Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Dr. Mike Corral and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Dr. Mike Corral are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
And welcome. Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Corral with Dr. Michael Murphy, and we're your hosts here on Snippets of Wisdom. Welcome. Today's episode asks a provocative question. Are the baby boomers the hedonists of the 20th century or the cosmic healers of the 21st? How do they fit into the modern interpretation of Edgar Cayce's prophecies? You remember Edgar Cayce? Especially the idea that 2026 marks a global awakening. Let's explore this with curiosity, compassion, and a little bit of generational honesty. So, just so we're clear, Edgar Cayce never predicted 2026, but modern interpreters have woven a lot of the themes in his work into a story that resonates with what's going on with us today. Building on these foundations, we're going to examine the narrative and how it has evolved today, blending prophecy with contemporary anxieties and hopes so that we can decide what we're going to do with it and how we're going to utilize it moving forward. So let's start by setting the stage for a deeper dive. Now we have, quite honestly, we have to talk about the boomer generation and how its contribution, how it came to be, and what its contribution is. Dr. Murphy, tell us a little bit about the two world wars, first of all, and how it spawned what is known today, as the baby boomer generation.
Yes, it's great to be with you again this morning, Coach Mike, and I'm just so eager to talk about this topic because it's so relevant to the 70 or so million of us who remain on the planet, we boomers, who are really making some very important choices about how we're going to manage this segment of our lives. And one of the things that's really relevant to that, I think, is the topic that we're talking about today, and that is using the tremendous understanding and the interesting lifetime of Edgar Cayce, the so-called sleeping prophet, as a person who was seeking to interpret the meaning of this human experience, and in particular, our generation, the generation that was born and has lived from about 1945 or so through 1965, the boomer generation. And during that period of time, it's really important to understand that World War I and World War II had occurred, and these were events that were truly catastrophic. I mean, they were world organizing catastrophic events in which tens of millions of people died. It was really a tragic human catastrophe of the largest order that humanity had ever seen up until that day. Just tens of millions of people being systematically killed by virtue of violence and conflict on the planet Earth. So it was just really, really, really very significant. And that's the time, if you think about it, when millions of people, tens of millions of people departed this planet, and then the boomer generation, about 100 million of us suddenly arrived, rather quickly in the post-war period of time, the couple of decades after World War II, the culmination of World War II, 1946, 1947, and then the I mean, the 15 or 20 years thereafter, a huge number of people that it includes us, we arrived. And so here we are, and we were faced with coming to grips with the psychological and emotional tragedy of
Yeah.
loss and violence that had just occurred, and then defining what we were going to do with our opportunity um, to live. And that's kind of the material that Edgar Cayce, who we're going to be talking about today, sought to access through his practice. He was sort of a medical professional who sought to give people what were called readings. Someone would arrive with a problem. They would say that they had some kind of illness or tragedy or uh, some kind of difficult situation in their lives. And he would go into a trance, and then he would start to speak, and he would access something that we're going to talk about later called the Akashic record, where he sought to access deep truths that he could share with this person then, that he thought would be of some service to them in clarifying their situation with
Mhm.
regard to their life predicament. And that's what he could do. And he continues. I mean, he no longer is alive, of course. I think he died in the somewhere in the 1940s or early
Mhm.
50s or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Uh, there continues to be um, a whole system and organization that supports his wisdom. So I think the key to this, the presentation that we're talking about today, is how we, us, we boomers, can choose to um, understand the meaning of our being, the meaning of our generation, and how we want to use the remaining time that we have on this planet in some way that we hope will be really of benefit and of positive use to humanity, such that we
Mhm.
can nudge things in a positive direction. So it's just a deep, deep, deep topic, I think, for all of us,
Yeah.
who are alive right now, are part of the boomer generation, and we, you know, I like to say that I was, and I certainly, it's true to say I was at Woodstock, just by virtue of chance. I just happened to be related to somebody who was going, and I jumped in the car and I ended up there. But Woodstock really was an example of one of these miraculous sort of events that just happened to occur. And it really captured the idealism that we boomers at our best can
Mhm.
manifest. Something really good, something magical can happen. So we're going to really be discussing that deeply today.
Yeah. So baby boomers, we as boomers have two sides to us. On the one side, we have the the Woodstock goers, the free love, the psychedelics, the hedonistic experimentation that took place, and a rise of the consumer culture. We became more aware of consumers, ourselves as consumers. And on the other side, we have the human potential movement. We have the yoga, meditation, and Eastern philosophy entering the West, the wave of holistic health, and um, activism for environmental awareness, and the spiritual seeking as well. But there's a looming question that I want to ask you, Doctor, and it's kind of a hypothetical because out at the heart of today's awakening, as a baby boomer, you of all people, you were a participant actually at Woodstock. What would you say? Do you ever wonder if pleasure is actually a path, a portal to enlightenment? Because that's part of who we are. That was an experimental part of us, but yet there's that other, you know, substantial part. What
That's a
in your
very,
opinion
very,
does pleasure have? Yeah.
yeah, that's a very, very great and deep question, I think, Coach Mike, in that we were confronted, our parents' generation, and therefore we were confronted with these tragic events that had happened, and we were naturally questioning the value of our parents' lifetimes, right? I mean, their lives were devoted to sacrifice and work and even facing death in these two monumental conflicts, World War I and World War II. And so then to come back from that and start to establish some kind of life pattern by virtue of which they could survive. In other words, work. So we boomers were looking at their lives and starting to question that. I mean, certainly the people at Woodstock were like, "Hey, we kind of don't want to be exactly like our parents. They work hard, they suffer, lots of loss, lots of suffering and pain, and so we kind of wondered as to the meaning of that. That was the birth of the philosophy that we called um, existentialism that we've talked about on this
Yeah.
channel in the past to some extent. That sort of looked at life and what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? I mean, these monumental events are happening that involve so much suffering, and then you try to work hard to survive, to get yourself the bare necessities of living. And so we, the boomer generation, started to question that and say, hey, what really matters? What really is the meaning of life? And we started to ask those deeper questions. Eastern philosophies kind of entered into that domain. We started to look at the, yoga, meditation, the patterns of introspection that were characteristic of Eastern thought. And certainly what happened at Woodstock kind of was a manifestation of that. People who were ready to live in communes and spend their time focusing on meditation and prayer and spiritual renewal rather than just the struggle to survive and to make progress or to be successful. So yes, I think that's a very deep question, Coach Mike, and I think it's one
You
that
know,
we
I,
face even more today.
I have to say that the political climate that changed afforded us the opportunity to do some of those things. We weren't living necessarily in the throes of war or any of that, but maybe in the wake of it all, and the flavor of having to scrimp and save and having to work hard and having to give up an education to put food on the table, and those kinds of things had passed. And so now, as a generation of experimenting people, and boomers are known for living in the extremes, but haven't we all lived in the extremes? Uh, uh, a world war is certainly an extreme to live in, and we adapted to that, the generations before us. And so, wouldn't you say that the context of the world has a lot to do with what we can afford to do and what we can afford to focus on, holistically?
Right, you
Don't
bring
you?
up the issue of the extremes and the way that our boomer generation, us, really were somewhat predisposed to the extremes of pleasure, positive pleasure through drugs or alcohol or free love. I mean, all this sort of self-indulgence that seemed to characterize an aspect of the boomer generation, though not all of it, at the same time as the extremes of sacrifice, meditation, fasting, activities that involve spiritual self-examination that
Mhm.
are really different from self-indulgence. So trying to find that balance between um, the pursuit of pleasure
Yeah.
and enjoyment, momentary gratification, versus the self-sacrifice and the struggle and the
The things that
work
we
that goes
have to
along with
do.
spiritual advancement.
Right. When we come back, we're going to talk about generational roles in our interpretation. You know, uh, of boomers. So don't go away. Stay with us.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. So here in this segment, we're going to explore how boomers have been portrayed across the decades, weighing our perceived pursuit of pleasure. In other words, our hedonism. People think that maybe our boomer generation was a little bit too hedonistic. But there is a good question, did that lead to enlightenment for us? Did that help us in any way? Did it help other generations to come in any way? We're going to discuss societal changes and expectations, how generational perspectives and are influenced by our generation. We also want to look at the influence that we have as a legacy, and how our generation is being interpreted and how it will contribute to the future. I know baby boomers responded to Edgar Cayce's legacy, among other people's legacy. Dr. Murphy, can you tell us a little bit about how people like Edgar Cayce are able to tap into these mystical resources, and how does it play out in our generation?
Yes, that's a great question, and I think that really, unfortunately, there's probably so many answers to that question that it's hard to fix on one. What's coming to my mind is this wonderful book that many people probably know about called The Autobiography of a Yogi. It's something that I would urge everyone to read, and that has to do with a young man. He grew up in India to a relatively privileged family in which his father wanted him, sort of in the American tradition, even though they're in India, to become successful in the world in which the father was already successful, to succeed him in running a major railroad or something like that. So he wanted his son to pursue sort of the life of business and money and all that. And yet that is, his name was Yogananda. I mean, Paramahansa Yogananda, I believe was his full name. He wanted to become a yogi. So his father was not happy to hear that. And yet he insisted, and over a long struggle over many years with his father eventually gave in, and so he devoted his life to spiritual practice. which he found to be the most pleasurable thing that one could possibly ever seek to achieve. So it's important to understand that it's not either one or the other. That is that spiritual practice can be extremely pleasurable. I mean, sitting and meditating and doing breath work and doing yoga, these are practices that if you do them, you really do feel the rewards, the physical and psychological and emotional and spiritual rewards.
Yeah.
So someone like Yogananda, as he explained in his book, Autobiography of a Yogi, was someone who did that. And he actually went down that path, found a spiritual master, and he spent his whole life sharing the wisdom that he was able to incur over time. And so I think that's something that has a message for us as boomers.
Yeah.
Now we're at a time where we're older, we're getting to the point where we have to make decisions about what we want our legacy to be.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly cared about his legacy and he wanted to contribute to the well-being of humanity through his spiritual practice and sharing the wisdom that he
Yeah.
collected over the course of his lifetime. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great question, and I think we as boomers now face that question. And you know, Edgar Cayce was a person who, uh, through his own spiritual practice, was able to access this domain that many people have probably heard of called the Akashic Record.
Mhm.
So when he had an inquiry from a questioner who came to him for service, uh, he would go into a trance. He was called the sleeping prophet, as we mentioned earlier, and he would start to speak um, in that trance after he had access
Mhm.
this domain called the Akashic Record, which is that domain in principle in which everything, all human experience, is recorded and saved. So it's important to understand. I know I grew up in a spiritual tradition, Catholicism, in which there was some sense that everything is remembered, everything you do is recorded within the sacred system. So you do something, what you do today is something that is recorded in some degree as your record of accomplishments or failures or struggles. But your story is something that you create every day
Mhm.
by virtue of your actions. And so, that's something that Edgar Cayce was able to access and then share with the people who came to him in the form of wisdom and suggestions and recommendations and even predictions that he made about circumstances that he thought would be of service to that person and to the world. It's very important to understand that Edgar Cayce was an example of a person, like Yogananda too, I think,
Yeah.
who um, understood that this universe is a vibratory manifestation and that we ourselves as human beings are
Mhm.
vibratory manifestations. And so by tuning into that vibration and seeking to be more resonant with it, and yoga is nothing other, the word yoga means union. So it really only means union with that vibratory process. By practicing yoga, you literally unify your own energy, your own human energy, with the process of that higher energy that is the universe itself, the manifestation of the universe itself. So that through meditation, through yoga, through exercise, through prayer, there are many forms of uh, that this pursuit of wisdom and understanding may take. And Edgar Cayce was someone who did a wonderful job of offering this to people over the course of many decades. And
Mhm.
hopefully, we boomers can do the same when we make this choice about what we're going to leave behind
Yeah.
for the coming generations.
There were three things that Edgar Cayce kind of sparked or triggered in our generation. One of them having to do with climate change, our anxiety around climate change, and this kind of a generational reckoning that we've all experienced, questioning our activity, our behavior with regards to how we treat the earth and how we're what kind of stewards we are over the earth, so to speak. Um, can you talk a little bit about that and how that is developed into a desire for us to reconcile, if you will?
Yes, I think, something that we can talk about, I think, is the practices that we can engage in order to ourselves be able to access this higher order of wisdom, which some people call the Akashic record or universal wisdom. And I think that one of the things that people do, I remember there was a story when I was in graduate school. There was a close friend of mine who was a devotee of Edgar Cayce. And one time he came by my house and he mentioned that he had been fasting for 6 days. So this is a pretty long time ago, before people really had gotten into fasting, which has become much more popular today.
Yeah.
Now people understand that fasting, as has been known for literally for hundreds and hundreds of years. People have fasted for the purpose of accessing a higher level of spiritual being, for getting more deeply in touch with an element of or an aspect of the universe that seems to be more uh, deeply spiritual. And that's certainly Jesus Christ. You hear about the time when he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and there's a whole story associated with that. But that long period of fasting really was a part of his process for cleansing himself and
Mhm.
readying himself for what ultimately was the ultimate sacrifice on his part, as a means of raising his level of consciousness. So
Mhm.
fasting, certainly yoga, um, breath work, there are many forms of practice that one can engage in order to raise one's level of consciousness. And Edgar Cayce did many of those things. And this friend of mine, as I mentioned, fasted for 6 days, and he really felt that sense of euphoria that one feels with extended spiritual focus, if you will. And I
Mhm.
think that is a real crossroads that we face as a boomer generation. We have the remainder of our lives. Many of us, fortunately, like you and I, are still very healthy. We have a bunch of time left. How are we going to use this time to serve uh, the planet Earth, our
Yeah.
families, our communities, the universe itself? I mean, certainly Edgar Cayce believed that if we manage our energy in a positive way, that positively affects the planet itself. It affects, to some extent, the universe itself, how we manage our personal energy. And so that's the decision that we face every day. And we really need to make that choice. As you said earlier, we either can uh, make that that choice, or it will be made for us. Either not making a choice is itself a choice. So yeah,
That's
so
right.
so we face this, and I think it's a critical and really wonderful opportunity for us as boomers to devote our energy and our understanding in the most positive way possible.
I thank you for that. That's really important for all of us to realize, because is our generations behind us that are going to be affected by not only what we say but how we behave, and the footprint, that the social footprint that we leave with our life choices. When we come back, we're going to talk about the implications and future outlook, um, and the awakening that has taken place not just for our generation but the generations coming. Don't go away.
Master of words, powerful player, What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Welcome back. You know, with all of that we have learned from the generation before us and our response to it, the decisions, the life decisions that we're making, our life choices, um, our behaviors day to day, the structure and the discipline that we provide for ourselves, that we give ourselves, all of this has an impact, and it creates trends for not only those in our own generation, but the generations that are following us. And it's important for us to keep an eye on what is trending, not for the sake of following the trends, but for the purpose of gauging the outcome, gauging the trajectory of our behavior, our choices. I think it's important for us to understand our influence, and while we're still alive and while we still have influence, and utilizing it to the effect so that we can um, feel good about the effects that we're bringing. You know, somebody said that the result of your conversation speaks volumes to how well you communicate. In other words, uh, the effect of your communication is the results you get. When we look at what we've been saying with our decisions, with with our voice, with our articulation, how is it affecting the other generations? Dr. Murphy, how do you think this is affecting how people relate to each other nowadays? We've had the family unit has all but dissipated, and people are making strong choices now that could probably affect the trajectory of humanity. What are your thoughts
Right.
on that?
So I think it's just a fascinating and very deep question that obviously we face as as a, a planet, really. I mean, all of us. It's sort of, I can see that, having worked for newspapers and other kind of publications in the past, that there's this statement in the field called, if it bleeds, it leads. And what that really means is that areas of publication and areas of media tend to seek out and promote sensational stuff,
Yeah.
which oftentimes includes violence. So violence is a way of getting attention, oftentimes for many people. And there's this thought, and I have seen this in my practice as a psychologist in various settings as well, is that people tend to engage in acts of violence, even against themselves or others, for the purpose of gaining some degree of notoriety. If you look at movies and films, and a lot of them are organized around themes of violence and
Mhm.
sensational, uh,
True crime is big nowadays.
all of it. And when
Yeah.
I come home, I talk to people and I say, I work as a forensic psychologist. Oh, they're fascinated by this, by the violence of it and all that they think goes on, when in fact, those are really not accurate renditions at all. So I think that
Mm.
one of the things that we really face now is really working to change that and say, let's take the worship of violence and the kind of retributive violence that oftentimes can be described as vengeance. Let's try to take that out of our culture.
Right.
Let's put the brakes, let's tap the brakes on that and sort of try to get to the point where we're not um, giving so much airtime to acts of violence and drama and excess that
Mhm.
really are not helpful to humanity. That's
Yeah.
not how one should be establishing
Right.
status and um, defining oneself as successful. That is by engaging in some act of vengeance or retributive violence or something like that. Let's start to emphasize cooperation and understanding and empathy and compassion. Let's
Yeah.
try to emphasize those things,
Right.
self-awareness and awareness of the interior world of others. And when we do that, I think we will find that if we just do that one act, if we work each day to be as um, deeply aware of the inner worlds of others as we can possibly be, we will find that the world itself will start to change and will
Yeah.
start to evolve in a positive direction when we're all pulling in the same direction. And that is to elevate the level of humanity. I mean, make things better for everyone. We're starting to question capitalism now, which probably is a good thing, though the
Mhm.
alternatives of communism or Stalinism haven't worked out so well either in the past. So we're really trying to figure out how can we come up with a system of living
Right.
financially, economically, that is good for the environment and good for everyone in
Right.
some kind of relatively
Yeah.
egalitarian way. And that's the challenge that we face. And it's not an easy challenge at all. We
It
really need
seems
to work
like
together. Yeah.
if we could possibly resist the temptation to monetize violence, the way it was with sex sells. Remember that was
Yep.
a
Yep.
tagline, and I think we satiated ourselves with that, and people got rich off it, and all kinds of good stuff happened. And now they're marketing violence as one of those things with true crime, things that are just kind of podcasts that are able to just uh, pull people in with a curiosity. But why do we need to know the gruesome details about how someone suffered? I don't understand, especially if there's nothing that we can contribute to help, unless we decide for ourselves that violence is not an answer, and we're better off, um, monitoring ourselves and what we can do to make the world better, instead of focusing on how it was not. I know it may sound simplistic, but you know, aren't there things that we can do to resist the temptation just because it's marketable, just because we can profit from it? Why do we have to go there?
Right. So in the past, I think in our parents' generation, way back in the 1950s and 60s and times like that, there were organizations that would set boundaries around that, right? So if there
Right.
was a movie that came up in the theater that seemed to be excessively lurid or violent, then the spiritual leaders of the community would say that's not something you should go see. You shouldn't
Right.
subject yourself to that. So it would disappear. So we need to recreate those kind of empathic and thoughtful choices about what our children, what the next generation is going to experience. And we want them to experience the situation of compassion and
Yeah.
love and caring and support and the realization that we want good things for ourselves and for our loved ones. and
Yeah.
to just talk about, the best ways that we can do that. That it's not a matter of conflict. We don't have to fight over the scraps. It's not a
Mhm.
matter of us arguing about who gets something and who doesn't get something.
Mhm.
Obviously, everybody needs to share and survive and thrive to the best of our ability. It's interesting, the statement from the Communist Manifesto that was a piece of wisdom. I mean, it has been perhaps misapplied, but it certainly was there. It says, um, from each according to their capacities, to each according to their needs. Right.
Correct.
So that's
I
a
remember
quote from
that.
the Communist Manifesto. You may remember it. From
Well, that
each
was
according.
even
Yeah.
that was even practiced. We used to quote that because we lived in communes, and communalism was one of the best things going for us. And for us, it was the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 44 and 45 said, all that believed were together and had all things common. They sold their possessions and goods and parted them to every man as every man had need. And that was a formula for communalism. And it almost sounds as if it had been taken from um, that manifesto, but the manifesto, in fact, came later.
Right.
So it has its roots in spirituality, and the premise is good, from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. But then we go into the extremes again, and it's kind of like licking the frosting off the cake and throwing the cake away when you just take the best part of it and you don't keep it in context, um, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
So we need to be vigilant, kind of ever vigilant with regard to the tendency for that to happen. The short-term gain, the short-term reinforcement, the short-term thrill may be very seductive. We may think, oh, gee, this will feel great right now, but it's not going to be beneficial to the long-term well-being of the community and the planet at large. So
right,
just understanding that um, it is our responsibility to do everything we can over the course of our lifetime to contribute to the well-being not only of others and our loved ones who are nearby us, but also for the planet itself and all of the cultures around the world, that we understand everybody. We're all one. We're all in this together. We're all on this planet together, and we all need to find a way to make this work, to share. In my experience in traveling around the world, and I've done a bit of that as you have as well, we I I really understand and see and meet people who are loving, caring, and supportive human beings everywhere.
yeah,
Every community, every town, every country, Russia, the United States, uh, Spanish American countries, countries of the Far East. All people seem to be kind and caring and receptive when we approach them in a compassionate and open way. And it seems like we just need to do that and understand that if we do that, the results will start to flow back for us and for them. So
yeah,
that's the key. And there's many ways down that path. And
yeah,
certainly some of the things we've talked about today have been a part of that. Fasting, meditation, yoga, exercise, and meaningful work. I mean, work that involves caring for others, as you have throughout your life. I mean, you've
yeah,
sought to bring uh, care and comfort to others. And if each of us do that to the best of our ability, the world will be a better place.
absolutely. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use rapport, building rapport with each other as a nation, as communities, as families, as friends, and how it can contribute um, to a legacy for other generations. So don't go away.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults Wednesday evenings mornings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
Okay, well, thank you for staying with us. This is an important time in our life as a nation, as a world. And, we used to rely on our external authorities, our institutions, our churches, our schools, our political arenas and platforms to tell us what was okay to do and what was not okay to do. And from there, it moved into the family units and family values that we relied upon to know what is right and what is wrong and make those decisions. Unfortunately, however, nowadays it's trickling down to the individuals. And now it's our responsibility as individuals to decide what do we believe is good and right, and what do we believe will perpetuate life, and abundant life, and life with a quality to it that is sustainable. We as individuals have to understand and make our decisions based on what our heart tells us, on what our soul tells us, um, instead of relying on external forces. Because what happens is we become the external force. By the decisions we make today as individuals, we become a force because people will emulate us. People will be attracted to the way we do things and will begin to emulate us as examples. So, Dr. Murphy, I think people would benefit from hearing more about how to contact you. And by the way, folks, if you like what you've been hearing today, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Please feel free to enter your comments and what you would like to hear us talk about as baby boomers. First of all, Dr. Murphy, let everybody know how they can get a hold of you and that.
Yeah, thank you so much. It really is, a critical issue. And the things that we're doing with this podcast is to try to affect this time in some kind of positive way to help the culture in the United States and around the world to just understand this human experience, this human journey more deeply. Snippets of wisdom are just little pieces of understanding that we have stumbled across in our long lifetimes that we want to share with others to the effect that they will also benefit from these podcasts. You can reach me on my website at psychologicalinvestigations.com. That's psychologicalinvestigations.com. My contact information is on that page, my phone number, uh, my office phone number to schedule appointments for psychotherapy meetings. And also, you'll find a lot of material related to some of the subjects that we've discussed here today. So I just really think that we really need your support, and I really want you to share this with other people so that we can make a difference in terms of increasing the probability that the world that we leave to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be even a better world than the world that we have shared ourselves. And it really is something that we can make a difference in. And these efforts that we're doing, we just really call forth to you to take the time and just take a moment to like and subscribe so that more people have the opportunity to hear this message of compassion and sharing and stimulation and fun, because we enjoy this whole process too. And I think there's this world is a magical place. It's a tremendous gift that we have the opportunity to live on this planet, as hard as it may be sometimes, and as much of a struggle as it can be and has been. And that's a topic that we're going to address in future podcasts. The meaning of struggle and the meaning of effort, and what is the purpose of the suffering that it seems that we need to go through in the course of a lifetime. And it really, the boomer generation is characterized by the suffering that our parents' generation went through. So yes, psychologicalinvestigations.com. I'd love to hear from you, and feel free to get in touch.
Thank you very much. By the way, if anybody is in need of personal one-on-one coaching, you can contact me at optimallifecoachingandpractices.com or olcp.life. We're here for you. We're here to help you optimize your own life. We're here to help you learn, experiment, and grow. Hopefully, we can contribute to your wellness, growth, and the mastery of your life. Thanks for being with us. Take care.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with hosts Dr. Mike Corral and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.